If you've ever seen a Studio Ghibli film, there's one thing you will have definitely noticed. The food. My god, the food. But it's not just the food that looks so appealing and wonderful. Something about what Studio Ghibli does with their animation makes the simplest, most mundane things look so incredibly special. Cooking, cleaning, frolicking. Studio Ghibli has a way of making the everyday seem magical. And I want to talk to you about why and how. After some research and a lot of analysis, I've come to the conclusion that there's 3 major reasons even simple or boring things look like fun adventures in Ghibli films. And those are, firstly, a Shintoistic worldview, second, an attention to detail, and thirdly, the juxtaposition of magic with realism. Each of these contribute in their own way to creating a feeling where you can't help but wish you were doing what the characters on screen were doing, even if it's the most boring of tasks. So strap in as we talk about how Studio Ghibli makes the mundane feel magical. Now, like all good media analysis, we must begin with a lengthy analysis of religion to understand what's going on here. For those who don't know, Shinto is the primary religion of Japan alongside Buddhism. In fact, it's fair to say that the two have a closely intertwined relationship. Shinto is the native religion of Japan, if we can even call it a religion, more on that later. Its history goes as far back as records exist in the land of the rising sun, and of its many facets, one of the most important is the concept of kami, what we might call gods or spirits. Now, I'm not an expert in Shinto, so if I get a few details wrong, then I apologize in advance, because reading about a thing is always going to be different to how it actually is as a lived experience. In Shinto, the belief is that kami exists everywhere around us, in the trees, in the rivers, and the food we eat. Later in Japan's history, when Buddhism arrived from China, it became sort of assimilated into Shinto, and their beliefs were sort of coupled together, with ideas such as striving for a humble life and seeking enlightenment becoming more popular. But this idea of kami remained, and you can find Shinto shrines everywhere. Little houses that are meant to remind and signify the presence of gods in the simplest of things. And this idea is not only a major influence on Hayao Miyazaki, but also Studio Ghibli films as a whole. You can always spot Shinto imagery in their films, and something like Spirited Away, for example, is heavily grounded in Shinto beliefs. But even when we're not explicitly talking about Shintoistic references, the concepts from it pervade every part of Ghibli films. Like Buddhism, Shinto isn't a religion in the same way that Christianity or Islam are, with distinct gods to worship and rules to follow. It's more of a moral code that you can or should adhere to, but it's not a strict god to pay reverence to, although there are obviously some Buddhist sects that do so. Rather than treating one divine being as sacred, the idea is that you treat the natural world around you with a level of sanctity instead. If everything around us is brimming with the presence of kami, then it makes sense that we should be reverent and grateful for everything. And this is the attitude that comes through strongly in Studio Ghibli films. Whether that's the bathhouse in Spirited Away, the forest in Princess Mononoke, or the garden in My Neighbor Totoro. Going back to food, this is why the custom exists in Japan of saying itadakimasu before eating a meal, in the way one might say grace before a meal in a Christian household. But rather than being thankful to God for the meal that He's supposedly bestowed upon you, you're saying thanks for the meal itself, for its very existence, for the value it brings. So this is the philosophy behind what Studio Ghibli does, but it still doesn't explain how it's able to make the little things feel so good to us watching, even in the West with no context for any of this. That's where we get to our next section and must talk about the attention to detail of Ghibli's work. If you've been on the internet recently, you would have seen the Studio Ghibli AI filter controversy. Now, if you're watching this video a long time after its release, I hope that this is a thing you're completely confused by, but it's likely you still know that multiple AI companies have been offering a filter that changes an image to make it look like it was done for a Studio Ghibli film. Now, not only were there rightly moral and legal questions about the fact that they could do this without any consent from Studio Ghibli, but also there began to be quotes circulated on the internet about how one of Studio Ghibli's founders, Hayao Miyazaki, felt about AI. And as is typical with the internet, there was a backlash, a counter backlash, and everybody thought they were in the right. Now, this may seem like a tangent, but I do want to get into this a little bit, because understanding this whole debacle will help explain exactly why Ghibli is able to make the everyday seem so real and yet magical. The first response from people came in bringing up this video, which I'll be showing you clips of right now, where Hayao Miyazaki allegedly is shown some AI work, and he responds by saying, "I strongly believe this is an insult to life itself."
極めて何か生命に対する侮辱を感じます。
Now, the way that was presented, it makes it sound like this is Miyazaki's stance on AI as a whole. However, soon after, a counter backlash emerged where people, presumably those wanting to defend the AI filter, said that actually, if you watch the whole clip, that is not what Miyazaki's saying, and that he's merely shown an AI model for zombie characters, and said he thought it was offensive to his disabled friend. Now, to avoid any copyright issues, I'm not going to play you the whole clip, but let me quote you what Miyazaki actually says, and then we'll discuss where the truth of the matter is and how it relates to the beautiful art that Studio Ghibli make. The context of the clip is that this guy who runs a telecommunications company comes to give Miyazaki and a few other Ghibli staff a presentation on what he's been working on, which is deep learning AI models. He then shows them a model which, as he describes it, uses his head to move as if it were another leg, which he says might be good for example, a zombie in a game. It's on seeing this that Miyazaki says the following. "Every morning, I see my friend who has a disability. It's so hard for him to just do a high five. Now, thinking of him, I can't watch this stuff and find it interesting." And then he adds the most important line, and we should take a note of this. "Whoever creates this stuff has no idea what pain is whatsoever. I am utterly disgusted. If you really want to make this creepy stuff, you can go ahead and do it. I would never wish to incorporate this technology into my work at all. I strongly feel that this is an insult to life itself." So in this case, the truth lies closer to the first interpretation of the quote than the second, for sure. Miyazaki isn't explicitly talking about AI as a collective here, but the sentiment he conveys is pretty clear. Let's go back to this idea of whoever creates this stuff has no idea about what pain is. I think this is what Miyazaki finds offensive. It's not that he views the zombies as somehow being comparable to a disabled person, it's that this creature has no idea what pain is, and the computer certainly doesn't. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into the discussion on generative AI, because that's a subject for a whole different video for a whole different channel. But all I'll say is this. From having read up enough on the subject to understand it, it's a fact that generative AI is incapable of creating something genuinely new. It can only replicate and mash together things that you've already shown it, and to that end, it also can't understand intent, and most importantly, emotion. It does not understand what the subject of its work feels, nor does it know what emotions it should evoke in the viewer. And as a consequence, it cannot truly depict reality. It cannot show you an image or video of someone experiencing true pain because it does not understand pain. If you read other quotes from Miyazaki as well, it's pretty clear that he believes that for an artist to make great work, they must depict life with some sort of realism. In fact, here's one from the book Starting Point, which is a collection of Miyazaki writings and interviews. He says, "Anime may depict fictional worlds, but I nonetheless believe that at its core, it must have a certain realism. Even if the world depicted is a lie, the trick is to make it seem as real as possible. Stated another way, the animator must fabricate a lie that seems so real, viewers will think that the world depicted might possibly exist." This is at the core of what makes Ghibli so great, and why their worlds can be both magical and yet so realistic that they invite us in. And why, to be frank, an AI could never understand that. If you look at even just the way Ghibli characters move, for example, you can see this idea of creating a believable lie. Take a look at this scene from the Ghibli classic My Neighbor Totoro, and notice the different ways that Satsuki and Mei navigate as they're exploring their new home. Satsuki, being not just older but also a mature, precocious child, moves with stability and purpose. She's careful about the things she interacts with, and every time she opens a door, her stance is very proper, and she makes sure to close it properly. Mei, meanwhile, is clumsy and ungainly, like a child still learning to move through the world. She's haphazard, frequently overshooting the things that she's trying to touch, and using too much force to open and close doors. You can see that Satsuki is actually looking around at everything she goes past, like she's actually curious about it. Mei, meanwhile, doesn't even look at half of everything, because she's really just copying her big sister. She's not actually that curious about every room of the house, as much as she just wants to be doing what her big sister is doing. Notice how when Satsuki walks past this radio jukebox thing, that she puts her hand on it, as if to steady herself when she walks. Mei, meanwhile, is just running full tilt to keep up and ends up tripping and falling over. Even in just a scene that's a few seconds long, the animators have not only brought personality to each of these characters, but realism. Now, as to how this realism makes Ghibli films so wonderful to watch, we have to talk about defamiliarization. This is a concept that was established by the Russian formalist Viktor Shklovsky and explored in detail by Zoe Crombie in her excellent article, The Spectacular Mundane in the Films of Studio Ghibli. Essentially, the idea is that in our everyday lives, we take most things for granted due to familiarity and repetition, especially visuals. We're not really paying attention, it's all just subconscious processing. Think of it in the way that you treat a new language when you're learning it, and how you'd pay attention to every word you say and think consciously about what you're saying, versus when that language is just second nature to you. This is what we do with everyday things like food and chores. So by drawing things in realistic ways, especially the mundane, animation and Studio Ghibli films in particular have a defamiliarizing effect on us, the viewer, because we're now being shown something that we know in a way that we don't know it, namely 2 dimensions. This forces us to take a proper look at things that we otherwise take for granted. So when we see food or a character doing some sort of mundane chore, rather than just gloss over it like we would in our normal lives, our brains are forced to take a proper look because what we're seeing still feels new to us. It's like when you see an image of an optical illusion. Your brain takes a second to try and process what it's actually seeing, and it's the same sort of principle at work here. And so things we do a million times over now suddenly get looked at in a new light in our minds, which is why it can feel so fresh and wonderful. On top of defamiliarization, there's another element to this too, which is that in so many Ghibli films, the characters are, essentially, content and happy in the everyday. If you look at the especially popular Ghibli films, Howl's, Kiki's, Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, all of them feature central characters who really take pleasure in the everyday. Cooking, cleaning, bathing, doing chores, the characters in these films all take genuine joy and wonder with what are otherwise seen as boring or dreary acts. And so, combined with defamiliarization, we as the viewer are forced to reassess our views on the domestic everyday things in our lives. The characters on screen are having so much fun that it makes the very act of doing chores seem magical somehow, or a part of self-fulfillment. It makes us wonder if maybe our assessment is wrong. But funnily enough, the reverse is also true. Not only does Ghibli make the mundane seem magical, but it also makes the magic sometimes quite mundane. If you look at the most popular Ghibli films which feature magic in them, I'm namely looking at Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and Kiki's Delivery Service, all 3 feature characters who don't actually use their magic for much more than everyday acts. In a lot of films, if magical characters exist, it will culminate in some sort of huge magical showdown where wizards and witches battle it out to see whose magic is stronger. But none of that happens in these films. Of course, a lot of this goes back to how Ghibli handles conflict, which I've spoken about in this video previously on my channel. Speaking of, if you're here and you've been enjoying the content so far, then I'd like to make a humble request. Would you be so kind as to consider supporting me directly via Patreon? I try to make authentic, heartfelt content that focuses on positivity, and doing so means not compromising these videos with ads from shady sponsors for money. But that also means I rely entirely on YouTube revenue, which is always subject to dodgy copyright strikes, and the support from my patrons. Patrons not only get additional benefits, but it also allows me to keep making content like this without having to worry about how I'm going to pay my bills. Alternatively, you can also drop a one-time PayPal donation, the links to both of which will be in the pinned comment and the video description. Now, back to talking about magic. As I said, magical characters in Ghibli films almost never use their powers for big, grand fights. Howl uses the most powerful magic to speak of, but most of the magic we see him use in the film is cute and mundane. He does sabotage some warships and use a lot of magic in fights in the climax, but doesn't have any impact on the plot per se. The conflict is only resolved by Sophie's love and her actions. In fact, in the original book, there's a huge flamboyant fight between Howl and the Witch of the Waste, but the film cuts this out. Similarly, Yubaba is not able to solve her problems with just magic, or Chihiro's for that matter. She's bound by rules and contracts herself, just like everyone else in the film, and you can take Haku as another good example. It's only Chihiro's hard work and her subsequent journey that can resolve the issues at hand. That's because instead, most Ghibli characters use their magic to assist with everyday things. Cooking, cleaning, transportation. Howl and Sophie and Chihiro only have magic to help them slightly speed up their tasks or just make them a little more fun. And think about the choice to make Kiki's powers simply the ability to fly, which is pretty small scale on the power level, rather than, say, being able to cast spells which automatically do her chores or solve her problems for her. This is what's so key about Ghibli films, in that they don't wish away the domestic moments. Magic, or even advanced technology, these things should not exist to take us away from doing the things that we do every day. They should only act to enhance them. Because, going back to the issue of AI, what is the point of life if we don't actually live and experience it? By putting magic into our chores, Ghibli films remind us that magic is only ever one step away from the everyday things we do. Much like the kami of the Shinto religion might, at any time, be hiding in the trees, or our houses, or our neighborhoods. And I might not believe in Shinto, but I do believe in this idea. We take the beauty of the everyday life for granted all the time. I do this constantly. But sometimes, when you stop and really look around, really take in the moment, you realize that you too might be living the kind of life that seems so fun and fantastical in a Ghibli film. A walk through the woodland, a moment of contemplation while washing the dishes, a lovely home-cooked meal you made yourself. These things can be magical if we learn to appreciate them, if we see the magic that is inherent in them. And I think that's what Ghibli films do by imbuing so much magic in them. And that's why they make us feel so warm and cozy and fuzzy inside. It's not that they're showing us something we could never possibly achieve, they're showing us another perspective on what we already have, defamiliarizing us to show us the joy of what we could do the very moment we stop the film and resume our lives. So I hope that when you're done with this video essay, you too consider the magic in the everyday, the wonder and amazement that is the life you live, the precious life that fought against all the odds to even exist. And I hope you'll learn to see that the everyday magic of Ghibli films is only ever one step away. Thank you for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it and made it all the way to the end, then please do consider supporting me on Patreon for the reasons I already mentioned in this video. Also, please do share in the comments what you thought of the video, what you'd like to see me cover next, or just hey, something positive you want to share. Check out the other videos on this channel, plenty of which are Ghibli focused, but I'd also love it if you checked out the ones that have nothing to do with Studio Ghibli at all, because you might well find something that takes your fancy. And I hope the next time I put out a video, you'll click on it no matter the subject. But that's it for now. I'll be back soon with another video. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.